EF20 Online is sponsored by the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City and KKFI 90.1 FM, Kansas City Community Radio. Please welcome your hosts, Stephen Melton and Jennifer Brown.
Hi, I'm Stephen Melton. I'm the co-leader of the Kansas City chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm here as one of the co-hosts for our presentation on EF20 Online called Making a Case for HR763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Jennifer, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself right while we're still here?
Sure. I'm Jennifer Brown. I am also a co-leader of Citizens Climate Lobby on the Kansas side. I got involved with climate change out of concern for my children's future. I joined Citizens Climate Lobby because I feel like this organization is focused solely on passing legislation that is going to be the most effective steps we could take. So effective first steps, I should say that. So Steve?
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we've got a slideshow, and I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to go through the slideshow, and then we can take questions in any time during the presentation. So let me share my screen, and I'll share this briefing, and let me play the briefing. Okay, and so you should all be seeing the briefing now.
We are not seeing your screen yet.
Oh, are they seeing it now?
No.
No, they aren't. Okay, let me let me share it. Okay, how about this? How about now? Now do you see it? Okay, thanks, Bob. It's a new way to do things. Okay, so let's just go through this slide. So this is about the HR 763, the House Resolution 763, the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act. And would like to thank Bob Grove and all the other great people at the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City for putting on this event this Earth Week. You see our names, Steve Melton, Jennifer Brown. I'm on the Missouri side, she's on the Kansas side, and you see our logo there, Kansas City, or Citizens Climate Lobby, the Kansas City chapters. You also see on there our website. We have our own website and would like you to come visit us and see what we do. It's kcccl.org. That's kcccl.org. And again, if you have questions that you want to ask during this presentation, go ahead and ask them. We'll be monitoring the Q&A box, and we'll answer your questions as soon as we can. Maybe some will wait until they fit into something that we're discussing right then. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a career military officer, and I have spent 40 years in the US military in one capacity or another. And my main interest in global warming is my granddaughter, Lainey, who's about 15 months old right now. And I want to make sure that we preserve life on this planet as we've known it for her and for her cohort, her classmates in daycare. I'll turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer?
Sure. So what is Citizens Climate Lobby? We are an international, nonpartisan, and nonprofit organization. We are grassroots and volunteer driven with over 180,000 members just in the US. We are organized across the United States in local chapters per congressional district. So, you know, since we're basically focused on lobbying, I believe we have one in nearly every district at this point in the US. We're working toward a comprehensive free market solution to climate change called Carbon Fee and Dividend. That's kind of the general name for the idea behind our legislation. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, also called HR763, is a current bill being considered in Congress. And it's partly a result of our lobbying efforts. So I should say, you know, regarding other countries, our group has had significant effects in Canada, where they've already have similar legislation, varies in the different provinces, but they have adopted carbon pricing all across Canada, partly as a result of our group. So I just thought that was interesting. I can take the next slide, Steve.
Okay.
So what does climate change mean for the Kansas City region? I think when people think about climate change, you know, they often kind of say, oh, it's a good thing we're not on the coast, you know. They think in terms of sea level rise and things happening in 100 years. Perhaps, you know, storms, that kind of thing. But really, we're predicted to be one of the worst hit sectors in the nation, primarily due to heat and drought. And when it's not too dry, it may be flooding and too wet. So what people may not realize is this is predicted to disrupt agriculture and lower our crop yields by about 40% by year 2050. And that's only 30 years away. That's for an agricultural state, I mean, that's quite an impact. And that's really just the tip of the problem. So, so pretty significant. You can take that next slide.
Okay, well, there's some good news is that Kansas City, Missouri is a leader on climate action. And we thank the Kansas City government for being consistent in its endorsing of the Paris Climate Agreement and its support for carbon fee and dividend, not only as by endorsement, but as a federal legislative priority. We'd also like to thank them and Evergy, which is our local electrical utility, for entering into a contract to provide the city with renewable energy. This would be for municipal operations. And that will be available by the end of 2020. Evergy has done a great service by lowering the amount of fossil fuels, the percentage of electricity it gets from fossil fuels pretty rapidly year after year. And right now their target, their pledge is to reduce their CO2 emissions by 80% by mid-century, by 2050. That's tremendous. But I would like to say, on the other hand, that for Kansas City as a whole, almost all of the reduction in CO2 emissions in Kansas City area is due to Evergy's reduction of the use of coal in its electricity mix. That the rest of us are not pulling our weight and are not reducing CO2 emissions rapidly enough. On the other side, on the Kansas side, and Jennifer has gotten busy over there, and she's got some local politicians to begin the Metro Kansas City Climate Action Coalition, and they spoke yesterday during the Speakers Forum, Mayor Mike Kelly did, about things that all municipalities can do to lower their carbon footprint. And they've done a great job, he and Councilwoman Lindsay Constance of Shawnee, and they have spoken at CCL activities, and they believe a carbon fee and dividend is necessary to get everybody to join in the movement to lower carbon footprints. Jennifer, I believe this is your slide.
Yeah. So yeah, all past Federal Reserve chiefs support carbon fee and dividend. So if you take a look at the pictures we have up here, this is Yellen, Bernanke, Greenspan, and Volcker. You know, if you think about it, it's their job to take care of our economy. And they say this is a good way to go. You know, the argument we often hear about addressing climate change is, oh, it's gonna hurt the economy. And these are the top experts on the economy saying that it's actually, they actually say that it may boost the economy some. They they are not saying it will hurt the economy. They're saying that it's necessary. So I think that's really an important thing to think about. The following excerpts are from a letter co-authored by 12 former chairs of the President's Council of Economic Advisors and 27 Nobel laureates in economics. So really anyone who's anybody in economics supporting this. So if you look at the lines we have here, global climate change is a serious problem calling for immediate national action. I think we'd all agree on that. This line, a carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. I think that's possibly the most important sentence in this entire talk. I'll say it again. A carbon tax offers the most cost-effective tool to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that science dictates. There are many solutions being put forward to the problem of climate change, and I personally am grateful for anyone willing to put effort in on this most important of issues. However, at this point in time, the urgency and scope of the problem are really looming. And we're in need of a solution that is effective. It's really going to get us moving in the right direction at this point in time. And carbon fee and dividend is one that fits that bill. Not saying it's the only thing that we need. I am saying that it may be the most effective first step we could take. A carbon tax should increase every year until emissions reductions goals are met. So it would be a steadily predictable, in 3 years, a business can say, my energy costs are going to be at this level. It's so therefore it might make sense for me to insulate this and this building that I own. It's very, very friendly to businesses who need predictability. The next line here, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Carbon leakage, that's kind of a funky term. What they're basically saying here is to prevent companies from relocating to places that it's cheaper to pollute, and to prevent American businesses during foreign trade, a border carbon adjustment system should be established. So imagine we have a carbon tax in America and we're trading with a country that has not set up a carbon tax. So number one, we don't want our companies just moving over there so they can pollute and not be affected. Number two, we don't want to hurt our businesses. So if they were if we were selling a carbon intense product to a country that did not have a carbon tax, our company would get a rebate from the government so that they would still be competitive. And similarly, if we're buying that product from a country without a carbon tax, we would add a tariff. And then the last line here, I'll also paraphrase. It's basically saying to not hurt the public and to keep people in support of this sort of a law. All the revenue from it should be returned directly to US citizens through equal lump sum rebates. So if you think about it, the goal of this sort of a carbon fee and dividend proposal is to make carbon products more expensive. So, if you think about how we taxed cigarettes when we wanted less smoking, it worked pretty well. So we're basically just taxing carbon to have less CO2 warming. And so we're giving individuals and businesses a good incentive to make greener choices. And the dividend goes back to families so that they're supported during that process so that they can still afford what they need. I can take that next slide, Steve. Thank you. Conservative climate leadership. Let me tell you about a conservative group called the Climate Leadership Council. If you look on the blue side, it's kind of smaller print there, but you might be able to see that we have some big names in the Republican Party, Secretary of State under Reagan and Bush, Secretary of Treasury under Bush, two chairmen of the President's Council on Economic Advisors. And there are some differences in the details if you look down below, but they are advocating nearly the same problem, nearly the same program. This is carbon fee and dividend. Rising carbon tax goes back to all Americans, and the same way that we would handle other countries. So really what's important with this slide is this is a climate change plan that both Democrats and Republicans can embrace, because it is not top-down regulations. It's market-driven, it's revenue neutral, it does not make the government larger. And those things are vital because we don't want it to, we need both sides to come to the table so that whatever climate change legislation we have is not just simply turned over with the next administration. I can take the next slide.
I think the next slide is mine.
Oh, okay.
Is that right? Okay. Well, it isn't just the leaders at the top that support carbon fee and dividend. Their polling has been done of the American people about their support of carbon fee and dividend. You know, first of all, you got to explain it to them, and then you get their reaction. And what's interesting is that among all voters, an overwhelming majority favor carbon fee and dividend, and the opposition is really minimal. Now, of course, you know, we all know the party politics in America. Democrats are more favorable toward it than are most Republicans. But even Republicans, you know, when asked, support carbon fee and dividend by a 2-to-1. There's 2 people who support it for every 1 that doesn't like it. But look at Republicans under 40, and these are the young people with skin in this game, you know, who are going to live to see the worst of climate change and are producing children, you know, who are going to see even worse climate change. They support it 7-to-1. They're like Democrats in this measure. They want something done about climate change. They want something done that's bipartisan, and they support carbon fee and dividend. So this is the political change that's going on right now. So let's get in and talk a little bit about carbon fee and dividend, and specifically the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, HR763. And this is a bill that would be effective. It is the single most effective thing we can do to stop greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. The single most effective thing we can do. You know, if you don't believe that, I'd like you to go onto the MIT simulator, En-ROADS, and play with it. And the most effective single thing we can do is put a price on carbon. We cannot stop catastrophic global warming without putting a price on carbon. There are other things we have to do, but if we fail to do this, we just don't get where we need to go. It's good for people, it's good for the economy, and it's revenue neutral because all the money collected is given back to the people. And we're very proud that Representative Cleaver from right here in Kansas City is one of 80 co-sponsors. I mean, this isn't just a bill that's in the minds of Citizens Climate Lobby and former chiefs of the Federal Reserve. This is the bill that's in front of Congress that has to address climate change, that has the greatest number of co-sponsors. So how does the bill work? Well, let's talk about where the money comes from. The money would be charged by fossil fuel companies at the source. And that would be at the mine or the well or the gas field. And it would start out at $15 a ton of CO2 equivalent and rise $10 to $15 each year, depending on whether or not we're on target for meeting the specified targets within the legislation. Now, when you think of $15 a ton, look at the bottom of it, and $15 a ton of CO2 is about 15 cents on a gallon of gasoline. So imagine gasoline going up by 15 or 20 cents each year based on based on these fees. As Jennifer also said, imports would pay the fee, which would shield US industry and would force really all the other countries in the world to adopt equivalent carbon fee system. Farm fuel would be excluded, as would military fuel, but that's a very small amount of the total here. And firms would also be rebated the fee for permanent CO2 capture and sequestration. That's kind of important because the scientific community is pretty convinced that we need to spend the first half of this century reducing our use of fossil fuels so that we aren't putting CO2 into the atmosphere. And we're going to spend the second half of this century taking a lot of that CO2 that we put into the atmosphere out. And that's going to be extremely expensive. So figuring out ways to do that is critical. It also eliminates some detailed CO2 regulations because, quite frankly, CO2 will be reduced very quickly under this, under carbon fee and dividend. So the detailed CO2 regulations are not really needed. I was asked a question in the chat room about would the carbon tax include other greenhouse gases such as nitrous oxide, methane, and fluorinated gases. I guess that's what's meant by F gases. And the answer is no, it doesn't. It only includes fossil fuels. Okay, that's what HR763 is aimed at, fossil fuels. But it does not keep nitrous oxide, methane, and fluorinated gases from being regulated, okay? These would still be regulated by the EPA as necessary, and we all know that all of them are necessary, especially methane, you know, if we're gonna solve the global warming crisis. Jennifer, I believe this is your slide.
Thanks. So yeah, talking about the dividend a little bit more. This is the fee. The fee would be returned to households as a monthly check, dividend. Each adult would get 1 share and each child would get a half share. And as we mentioned before, it's going to start at the $15 per ton CO2 rate, and it's just going to rise predictably every year by $10. So you'd be very, you know, you can plan for the future if you needed to know. The dividends can be spent freely. It's just a check. And market pressures alone would reduce fossil fuel use over time. So basically, if you think about it, as companies have increased costs, they're going to pass those along to consumers, making carbon heavy products more costly, and it just creates an incentive across the board for individuals and, more importantly, companies to make greener choices. It's especially important to incentivize corporations. I believe I heard that they are responsible for some 70% of CO2 emissions. So if they don't have incentives, we're just not going to get very far. In the slide, if you see this figure here, the $3,456, that represents what a family of 4 would receive per year after this bill had been in place for about a decade. So just to give you an idea. I can take the next slide, Steve. The most vulnerable generally do well. In 2016, Citizens Climate Lobby commissioned a study to assess the net financial impact on US households of implementing this program. We wanted to know, is it going to help people? Is it going to hurt them financially? How is it going to be? So if you're looking at this slide, the darkened areas here represent the portion of the population that would receive more in dividend money than they would pay out in increased costs of energy and costs of living once the bill's implemented. So they're kind of highlighting here. These are This would be all households, and this is these are divided into quintiles by income level. So this quintile 1 being the lowest income level and quintile 5 being the wealthiest. And they're highlighting here that 86% of the lowest income quintile are actually getting more money after the bill's in place than they would have had beforehand. And you can see overall, the majority of people are coming out ahead. Even and the poorest families gain the most, up to 7% of their income. And in contrast to that, the wealthier families more or less break even. They may be losing, but the proportion that they're losing is very small compared to their overall income level. So as Danny Richter, our legislative director, says, with carbon fee and dividend, winners win big and losers lose small. Most people benefit, and those that don't lose so little that they probably won't even notice it. So just wanted to point out, I think this is something that people often worry about. We can move to the next slide.
Well, let me just, if I can, let me make a comment on this one. And I'd like to tell a story here. There's good news and bad news stories about what's going on with global warming and people lowering their carbon footprint. But the reality is that we've got a sizable percentage of the American public who believes that global warming is a hoax. They don't believe what the scientists are telling them, and they aren't about to lower their consumption of fossil fuels. I mean, when fossil fuels go down to $2 a gallon like they are now, they just say, well, that's just great. We'll just drive around more. And, there's a lot of people in the United States, who are concerned about global warming, but just don't know what to do. And because they don't know what to do, they dither, and they aren't lowering their carbon footprint much at all. And you've got a few people at the top who are very concerned about this issue, who are very virtuous about this issue. And we are taking measures to lower our carbon footprints, but that's only a few percentage points of the population and not enough to really move the needle. So the reality is we aren't doing much in this country to lower our CO2 carbon footprints, not much at all. Now, what carbon fee and dividend does is it aligns the global interest with individual interest through a market mechanism, okay? So that's great. You're rewarded economically if you lower your carbon footprint. You're punished economically if you don't. And so it changes the whole game then for people, because by getting the money back, they begin to play a new game about, well, am I lowering my carbon footprint enough so that I'm making money on this carbon fee and dividend program? And it will change the dynamics of households. It will change the dynamics of businesses. It will change the dynamics of governmental decisions and align those governmental decisions or those decisions of those entities using pricing. And pricing power is very powerful for people. It really does determine their behavior to a much greater degree than do harangues by scientists about we got to quit doing this or it's going to end up bad. So by aligning people's personal interest with the greater good, we can get a lot achieved. I hope that makes sense.
Well said.
And so here we are. What happens with the Carbon Dividend Act? Well, first of all, we're doing, we're going to grow the economy. We're going to grow the economy greatly through the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act. And why is that? Because we're moving money from rich people to poor people, rich people with big carbon footprints who are going to be powering the system. And, it'll move toward people with lower carbon footprints who happen to be lower on the income scale. And we believe this plus the surge in renewable energy jobs will create more jobs in the economy than we would have if we just stayed with fossil fuels. But the bottom line is really this, is that we're going to save a lot of lives, because everybody knows we lose a lot of lives in this country because of coal, because of burning of coal, because of burning of fossil fuels of all types, respiratory problems. So we're going to save a lot of lives. And very importantly, and this is why we're doing this, is we believe we can say we will reduce CO2 emissions by 40% in just 12 years, and will get us on the road to meeting our Paris climate objectives. I think that is the single most important thing. And we believe we can do that in 12 years, and we believe that in the remaining years after that until 2050, we can get at least 90% of CO2 emissions that are caused by the burning of fossil fuels. We can get that much reduction. And because of the border adjustment tax, we can force other countries to get commensurate kinds of reductions in their CO2 emissions, because the United States has a central place in the global trading system. If we adopt a carbon fee system, everybody else in the world, if they want to trade with the United States, is going to have to adopt a similar carbon fee system. So that's critical. Jennifer, why don't you sum up?
Sure, what can you do? Well, you know, I'd say the most important thing is to contact your congressman. You know, I've been doing this since about 2011, and you know, when I started, I was always dubious about whether our congressmen hear us when we contact them, whether it matters. You know, maybe they're of a different party than we are, and I wondered if that really even helped. But I can tell you, after working for quite a while in this group, they do hear us. They are listening. You know, they may not read a 10-page diatribe, but if you call them regularly or write them regularly and say, hey, I care about climate change, or better yet, please co-sponsor the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, that they do hear that. And that is one of the more, when we meet with our members of Congress, and we do many times per year in district and in Washington, DC, you know, one of the things that we used to often hear was, oh, people don't really care about this. We're not hearing from them. And when I talk to people, I'm finding lots of people that care about this. So that's a disconnect that it's really important for everyone to work on. Secondly, vote climate. We have a really important election coming up. You know, find the person of your choice that cares about the climate and get out there and vote. And join us. We need help. We'd love to get you on board and help us get the word out. So you're certainly welcome. So thanks, Steve. I guess we need one more slide here.
I think we do have one more. Oops, no, maybe we don't. Uh-oh, we don't.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, we can just stay on this one. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. Oh, we do have another slide.
Great, that's our summary.
Now we do. This is the one. Did you want to talk about this? This is kind of a summary of everything that we've talked about. But Jennifer, do you have another comment to make?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that we have Steve coming up as a CCL panelist on the Fight for Our Future talk at Wednesday at 6 p.m. So I wanted to make sure I added that. And it looks like we may have another question here. No? Am I wrong? Maybe not. I don't see it. Okay. So
okay, we had one earlier on that I hope I answered well enough. Okay, so this is let's get a little bit personal now. We got a few minutes. I talk to a lot of people, listen to a lot of people in the climate movement, and a lot of them have very virtuous things that they're working on. They're working on composting. They're working on planting trees. They're working on, community gardens. They're working on a lot of great projects. And I'm sort of an eco freak from way back. Even though I made my career in the Army, I've always had a place in my heart for the environmental movement. And I remember the first Earth Day. I was in high school way back then, and I've always recycled. I've always done all that stuff. I drive a Prius. All of the electricity I get comes from renewable sources. Nobody will burn a lump of coal and say they're doing it for my benefit. I planted about 100 trees out back. I got a big compost bin. I've got all these things going. But do I think that I'm stopping global warming by doing that? Absolutely not. Because everything that I do is subverted by other people, some of whom in my family. Let me tell you about my in-law up in Gower, who just bought one of these monster Ford F-150 pickup trucks, with the 4 doors. He says it gets 15 miles a gallon, but I think he's exaggerating. But if he did get 15 miles a gallon, that means over the useful life of that car, he'd put 130 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And that's what we're dealing with here, 130 tons. Think of a rail car packed to the gills with coal, and that's 130 tons, okay? We have got to figure out a way to get the people who don't care about this issue to contribute to the solution. That is the reality. If we just rely on the people who care about it, we aren't going to solve this problem.
No.
We need to get the people who don't care about it to contribute to the solution. And the only way to do that is to put a fee on carbon.
I agree. Steve, we have a question here.
Okay.
Christina Kohler says, has the impact on economic development / trade from developing countries been considered? I wonder if there are arguments against the quote, every country that trades with the US needs to pay the tax, such as counter arguments to WTO in the past, World Trade Organization in the past.
I'm not really sure I fully understand the question. It is legal for us to put a border adjustment fee on carbon. And where this is really going, if you talk to the people at Citizens Climate Lobby or in the US Congress, is there will be international agreements made on carbon fees. Is it legal under the WTO? It isn't illegal. Is that the question?
She added, especially since the developing world has not been responsible for creating the problem to such a large extent and will be impacted the most by climate change.
That's great. The whole issue, who will be impacted most by climate change? I hear those words, but the fact of the matter is extinction is going to hit us all. I mean, if we destroy life as we know it on this planet, it's going to be the poor people, the rich people, and everybody in between who are going to pay the price. Nobody will survive it.
Well, they're certainly going to get hit the worst and the earliest,
Well, yes. I imagine that's true. I imagine that the people with money are going to try to maintain their lifestyles and their lives for as long as possible. But when the ecosystems of the world start breaking down and the food chains start breaking down, and that will happen later this century if we don't address it now, we will all be in a big world of hurt. The reality is only we're all in this together, and we can't hold the solution hostage to any one group. We have poor people saying, well, I'd like to do something about global warming, but I'm going to hold the solution hostage to policies which I think are virtuous. And then you have rich people saying, I'd like to do something about CO2, but I don't want to sacrifice any part of my lifestyle, and I don't want to sacrifice my business model. The fact is we will, that's a game that we will all lose. We need to realize that putting additional CO2 into the atmosphere is a threat to everybody's life, and we need to quit doing it. And we need the most powerful mechanisms we can to preventing additional CO2 pollution on this planet. Are there any other questions? Jennifer, or do you have, why don't you finish off?
Oh, Al was just asking how often we meet, and I was just going to say that we meet monthly, and you can certainly get on our website if you're looking to join, kccl.org.
And I'm going to see if we can stop the share. This is so hard to do, stopping the share.
All right.
I can't see my mouse. So I just can't figure out how to do it. Let me see, maybe if I do that. Okay, let's do this. Okay. So I think we have one more question. Do we have a question?
Yeah, well, Dave was just saying that there's a, Catherine Hayhoe is going to speak for Citizens Climate Lobby on the 25th, and you can certainly find information about that on the Citizens Climate Lobby website.
Right, right. Yeah, I think she's going to be speaking at noon, and she is an individual who comes from a religious and scientific background who talks about global warming and how we need to address it. And, you know, she's a big supporter of Citizens Climate Lobby. Yeah. Well, Jennifer, I'm going to give you the last word to sum up.
I'm sorry, I'm just typing some answers here. Someone was asking if we have different groups, and I was just saying yes. You know, we have we're organized by state and by district because we're each working toward different members of Congress. So yeah, but if you get onto our website, that is for all of us, and we can certainly find you if you contact us on that kccl.org.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say that even though we have separate organizations for our monthly meetings, we get together a lot. And, you know, obviously we're doing this together. We did the Saturday talk together. Whenever we do tabling in the Crossroads or at First Fridays in the Crossroads or other events, we always do them together. So, you know, Jennifer knows all the people in the Kansas City, Missouri side, the real active people, and I know a lot of the people on her side. So we do get together a lot, and I think that's very important.
All right, we're getting 30 seconds here, so we better say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, and thank you for all of you who listened in on this. If you have additional questions, please contact us. And, you know, the big takeaway in all of this is to vote climate. If nothing will happen unless we get representatives in Congress and at all levels of government, state, local, federal, who are willing to stop climate change. So vote climate and get all of your friends and relatives to vote climate as well. Okay, that's the sign. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.